Thank you.
Hello, my name is Chloe and my pronouns are she and they. I am NEADS lead researcher and the moderator of today's panel. Thank you for sharing this space with us. I am a white queer settler. This ultimately signifies that I benefit from resources and resources generated and disseminated by First Nations, Métis, and Inuit persons, Indigenous disabled persons, as well as two-spirit peoples. I greatly reside on the traditional territory of the Ottawa and Nisinapic, Haudenosaunee, and Lumne-Biwak peoples to the territory of the Algonquin peoples will forever be my own. And where I first learned from indigenous communities. When I did my walk, when I take a walk with my dog on country roads or spend time with my horses in the field, I recognize my privilege to witness the beauty that is nature. When I retain knowledge in my own office, I acknowledge the coloniality that prevails in the fields of disability studies and sociality studies, where both my community-based research and doctoral research are located. As a community based researcher and a doctoral student, I am continuously learning about the intersections that exist between disability and indigeneity, and ultimately how society further marginalizes these intersections. Through my work, I commit myself to unlearn knowledge embedded in colonialism and recognize the systems of oppression that remain at the forefront of education. I strive to improve my own learnings of the world that I readily benefit from. Adela?
Thank you, Chloe.
Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to our Virtual Access for All event. My name is Adela. I am NEADS Research Support Officer. I will be going over the Virtual Access for All project. NEADS is a by and for cross-disability, cross-Canada charitable organization supporting full access to education and employment for disabled post-secondary students and graduates by working across 3 strategic areas of debt reduction, experience in class and on campuses, and employment. NEADS offer a variety of events, resources, reports, financial assistance program, and opportunities for disabled students and graduates. We collaborate with post-secondary stakeholders and other non-governmental organizations, employers, disability services providers, and community members to improve opportunities in higher education and the labor market for disabled students. We also provide ongoing evidence to Employment and Social Development Canada and provincial and territorial governments to work to promote government programs and services that support higher education for disabled students. The Virtual Access for All project is a 2-year project funded by Employment and Social Development Canada's support for student learning program. The Virtual Access for All project supports disabled students to successfully navigate the transition to post-secondary education. Since the beginning of this project in 2021, we have been connecting students with existing mentoring opportunities and resources. We've offered webinars on various topics related to accessibility, expanding our National Student Award program, and funded our Accessibility Resilience program. Disabled students often experience systemic barriers to education, which makes it even more challenging for them to complete their studies and may cause them to graduate with more debt. Projects such as this one play an important role in ensuring disabled students can successfully complete their studies and be a part of an inclusive economic recovery for everybody. That is all for me. So back to you, Chloe.
Thank you, Adela. Entrepreneurship is a means of employment increasingly becoming more attainable for disabled and neurodivergent students and graduates than other employment opportunities. Not only can disabled and neurodivergent entrepreneurs actively contribute to society in a way that is most meaningful to them, but they can also do so in an environment that accurately responds to both their access needs and expertise. Disabled and neurodivergent entrepreneurs innovatively assert their rights to employment by generating employment positions wherein they can thrive in the workforce. They dismantle barriers and preconceptions related to productivity and work that are readily imposed by notions of capitalism. Today's panelists will unpack the meaning of entrepreneurship in their daily life and explore the possibility of entrepreneurship as an accessible and inclusive means of employment. Let's meet our panelists.
The first panelist I'll be introducing is George Violet Parker. George Violet Parker is an award-winning disabled and queer writer, performer, and co-director of Queer Stage Revolution. Their performance history includes V&A Performance Festival, Edinburgh Fringe, Manchester Pride, Les Majest, okay. Their work appears in Dyslexia, Financial Times, Arachne Press, Bypass Lines, and more. Published and forthcoming books include Twisted Roots, Reconnecting Rainbows, Not Your Orlando, Punk Dust, and Gynandromorph, Written Off. Okay.
I will be introducing Hibak Abdi. Hibak is an immigrant and former refugee to Canada living with a physical disability. Passionate and driven, she has launched Ontario Without Barriers, which is a dynamic platform dedicated to helping adults with physical disability navigate resources in Ontario. She's a registered social worker with both a bachelor's and a master's in social work. Hibak brings a wealth of knowledge and experience to her mission. Her diverse background includes media and marketing expertise, thanks to her bachelor's in media, information and technoculture, MIT from Western University, and a marketing diploma from Fanshawe College. Hibak has always been a fierce advocate for bridging the gap in resource provision for disabled students and disabled people in general. With her previous website, freshability.com, she empowered students seeking post-secondary education and highlighted the critical shortage of resources for students with disabilities. Hibak leverages her unique lived experience to generate awareness about accessibility and disability through her engaging YouTube channel and social media. Her personal and professional passions lie at the intersection of accessibility, resource navigation, and disability advocacy. Join Hibak on her inspiring journey by following her on social media. I believe the link to her social media account is, you can view it on your screen, and you'll be able to visit her on her website, which is ontariowithoutbarriers.ca. I'm also going to include it in the chat.
Lastly,
Thanks.
I'll be introducing Logan Wong. Logan identifies as a trans, biracial, autistic wheelchair user, as a social worker and equity, anti-racism, anti-oppression, and accessibility professional. Logan has worked on numerous task forces and executive committees within the Child Bright Network and at CanChild Center for Childhood Disability Research. As an entrepreneur and owner of Idea Perspectives Training and Consulting, he uses his understanding of the world, organizations, systems, and people to support the creation, implementation, and sustainability of diverse, equitable, and inclusive environments that reflect that everyone has different needs, strengths, and talents that should be celebrated. So here are our panelists for today's discussion. Thank you.
think Angela and Shalali, we will begin the discussion now. Question number one. How do you define entrepreneurship, and does disability and all neurodivergence influence that definition? I would ask panelists to raise their hands if they want to engage with a question. Thank you. Yes, you back.
Yeah, like for me, I define entrepreneurship as like seeing that there's like a gap in resources and a gap in the marketplace that you can fill. And because with my company, I consider it like a social impact business because it's for profit, but it's also meant to help the community and help people like in need. And so having that lens of wanting to bring those two together, I think is like what entrepreneurship means for me. Having a disability affecting that definition isn't affected in the sense like people with disabilities or people who are neurodivergent still have the ambition to create their own business and create their own like community-based projects. It's just the added barrier in terms of like, for me at least, like going to like networking events, like I have to ask ahead of time if it's wheelchair accessible. I obviously have a lot more limited physical ability than an able-bodied entrepreneur that can work like literally 20 hours a day. I can't physically do that without jeopardizing both my physical health and my mental health. Because it takes longer in the day for me to do a lot of things, including medications and like morning prep and evening prep and stuff. So there's a lot more things to take into consideration, as well as like doctor's appointments and like, because sometimes when you're somebody like myself, you might have a lot of specialists that you have to do several different other things and stuff. So it's a lot to do while also trying to be an entrepreneur, but it doesn't mean it's like impossible. There's just added barriers that you won't recognize until you start that process.
Thank you, back. You've raised a lot of key points that we will unpack later. Thank you for that. So,
yeah, really good points, and I think I've resonated with quite a lot of them, as I'm sure many of us do. There's this beautiful correlation between entrepreneurship and disability, and I think I see a lot of disabled entrepreneurs because it's a way of making money, but it lends itself to our lifestyle. So we're catering to our needs through like making our workplace accessible, making our way of life accessible, which is amazing. So it's, I guess, like the definition is setting out on your own or with a small group of people to make profit from your endeavors. But I think what I'd like to add to that is that as a disabled entrepreneur, you're creating a way of working flexibly that suits your needs, that enables you to cater first and foremost to your health and well-being, or you should be, unless you're getting sucked into the whole capitalistic mindset, in which case you're like, I must be productive every second of the day, even when I'm in a massive flare up and I can't actually like get out of bed or feed myself or do anything. Yeah, and so that can be a very tough balance to strike, but I think once you do find it, it's a really wonderful place to kind of like abide in and to feel like you're contributing and you're doing something that's benefiting not only you but your community as well, but in a way that's healthy. So yeah.
thank you, so Logan.
Yeah, I think a lot of what George mentioned resonated with me in terms of me not seeing flexibility in other workplaces. So I essentially created my business and became an entrepreneur to create that flexibility for myself, so that I can take care of my health and well-being as best I can, because I found that the opportunities within like remote workplaces and the flexibility of this capitalist society like is just not conducive to queer or disabled workers. So I just how I became an entrepreneur was to create the space for myself and be able to make a living at the same time.
Thank you, Logan. Question. Sorry. Question number 2. What is your journey as a disabled and neurodivergent entrepreneur? And and why did you choose entrepreneurship as a means of employment? Yes, you got.
I actually, even though I had a website before, that was more so just to, you know, provide resource for people. Because even during like my media studies and my marketing studies, like I had a lot of people approach me, who were, you know, parents of children with disabilities or people who were like OTs and social workers wanting to have advice and guidance for the next generation of those with disabilities who are going to post-secondary education. So that one was a bit sort of like a not-for-profit, but like for me, when I did my social work education, like I honestly wanted to work in a hospital or a physical rehab setting. That was my intention because that was what all my placements were in, and I absolutely loved it. And that path would have happened if it wasn't for COVID. During like that whole pandemic, I realized as a person who's medically compromised, working especially in a hospital setting was going to be dangerous for my health. And that's when I started to pivot and be like, maybe if I start my own business, I can work from home. I can do the job that's still meaningful to me, but in a safe environment. And it's really, you know, proven, like as people have said, like Logan and George, like it is something that like you can choose your own hours, you can choose things that like fit your schedule. If like, you know, if I'm battling pneumonia or something, I don't have to worry about being in the office doing a 9 to 5. And so those are the two things that like led to me being an entrepreneur, because I wanted something that was safe, but also flexible.
Thank you back. So
Keep forgetting to unmute myself, sorry. So I've had a variety of roles in my working life. I really wanted to be a sailing and powerboat instructor, so being very physical, really long hours outdoors, you know. And then TLDR, everything went very wrong. So I started kind of like trying to find roles that I could do. So I'd been teaching children with physical disabilities on the water, so I started doing that in schools, and then my health just got catastrophically bad to the point where I had to stop working completely. Then just as I was working my way back up, COVID happened. I got COVID, I had a small stroke, I developed MCAS, it all went completely wrong. Huge flare of all my other pre-existing conditions. And I guess, yeah, I think a lot of people found that during like lockdown over here, we were kind of forced to shift around and see what we could do. And certainly having to work around loads of different health conditions was like very suddenly, but still have an income was really challenging. But I'd had some poems published previously and some short stories. So I started doing that a little bit more. I started running workshops and running courses and entering competitions and getting commissioned to write articles. And then it just gradually built and built to the point where I got my novel published, and I could actually make a living from writing and from teaching people and having like mindful writing workshops for people, which during like, you know, the height of COVID was like really important and really wonderful. And then it kind of developed, because I thought that's lovely, but now kind of people are opening back up, we're going back into the real world, but there's very little kind of safety for people in terms of accessibility. So I was still running workshops, but then I was also trying to get on stage in people's faces. So I started doing drag, obviously. So I combined this horrible Frankenstein's monster mix of poetry, spoken word and drag, just so I could kind of shove messages down people's throat, but in like a way where they didn't really feel like they were being lectured. So like, oh, you probably shouldn't kill disabled people. But if you cover it in glitter and then make them laugh while you're doing that and kind of like do a little routine, they take it in. So I started doing that. And then I realized that actually disabled queer performers get treated horrifically. I don't know if anyone is familiar with that, but there's virtually no accessibility. Every queer venue is down 50 stairs in a basement where no one can breathe. It's absolutely horrendous. So we set up a cooperative, a disabled queer performers cooperative. So we started doing shows, teaching other people about accessibility, and it's been wonderful. We've got funding, we can actually educate people, we can go and start working at festivals and asking for the things that we need, like, hey, it'd be really nice to have a wheelchair ramp, because what we found was even massive shows like Pride in London, which is obviously huge here, people that were organizing it literally said to us, oh hey, we could put the wheelchair ramp out, but it would make it look really messy, so we're not going to do that. And so you kind of think, I literally cannot believe the inaccessibility that we're having to encounter. So making spaces for queer disabled performers has been amazing. Sorry, I've completely gone off topic. Yes. So now I'm at a point where I've got all these different little things that I can do. And if I don't feel like staring at a computer screen for 2 hours a day, I can probably do something like create a drag number, or I can, you know, do something in a different way. But it's working around, for me personally, it's working around doing all the different bits, so that I'm not doing just one thing, kind of like 8 hours a day. So I can go and perform, but then that will knacker me out for 3 months, but then I can go right. So it's fine. So it's a good mix of physical, mental, creative, being a producer, and it works. Yes.
Thank you so much for sharing those, Loki.
Yeah, so I was just gonna say that, like, I don't know, I was lucky enough to graduate during the pandemic and get a full-time job, but then I found that um the pressures of having a full-time job and like having it be like my only thing that I'm doing was a lot. So I'm the type of person that needs like to do multiple things at one time to like keep my interest and keep and basically keep sane. Um, so I currently also have multiple other jobs, but then I created my my business for, you know, to have an outlet for my passions, but also to give myself something else to do aside from sitting at my computer all day, 9 to 5. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. We will Nou, je gaat heel verder en nog tijd with I'm excited about the question 3. How did you verder first come to fruition? How is it currently taking shape? Let's start with source, then impact, and finally Logan.
Cool. So I think, well, I did touch on this when I did my last epically long answer. Sorry. So yeah, like I said, I've got many hats and it's growing bit by bit. It's kind of a fractal snowflake type situation. I've got more publishing deals, which is great because it means that it's starting to generate bits of passive income. I can pick and choose shows like based on pay and accessibility. So I'm, not busting my behind for, like 50 quid and 10 days of preparation and stuff. I'm kind of actually being a bit more selective, which is so helpful because I think we all can relate to doing like one event and then being completely out of commission for the next 3 weeks. So it's making it really worth it. All of my work is basically promote disabled queer artists or, have disabled and queer representation kind of getting out there. So I get to do that in a variety of ways, which is making me really happy. But then the more you succeed, the more opportunities there are. So I'm starting to see a bit of financial success too. I think how it came to fruition and how it began, I really have to mention Andrew Gerzer here, and because they are like this incredible disabled queer Canadian entrepreneur who kind of took me under their wing and was like, look, like you're not always going to be able to find a job that can not trigger all of your allergies, not make you, all of these different conditions that you have to try and work around and which are literally impossible to try and find somebody else to employ you and provide those accommodations for. So they told me about their journey, we spoke about it, and then it was kind of like this snowball of like, oh, I really can have the confidence to go and make my own way, which was amazing. So that's kind of all progressed, and then I'm waiting to hear back about a funding for an 18-month project, which is all about like disabled queer poetry with a budget that I wouldn't have even imagined applying for like 6 years ago. So it's just built, and I think the community support has been incredible.
Think those impact.
Yeah, so like my venture sort of came into fruition as I was like finishing up my master's in 2023. The reason I went into my master's was so that I could like work as a social worker either in physical rehab or in the hospital, but obviously COVID sort of kiboshed that idea. And so I was near the end of my program and I was kind of figuring out what to do, what the next steps were. And in February or March of 2023 was when the like concept of ChatGPT came up and the website was launched and the whole idea of AI search. And as my career in social work, I knew there was like different websites that provided like resource information, but it's all like a list of links that you have to then go through and you have to do all the research as somebody with a disability, or if you're like a caregiver, or if you are a practitioner. There's resources out there, but you have to spend sometimes hours doing the research of finding that information. And so I wanted to see if I could integrate the AI technology with disability resources so that people could just type in a question and say, I need resources for like a new wheelchair. And it would take you to the information that there is through the ministry for both like for government funding and also not-for-profit funding for those type of concepts and those type of topics and stuff. And so that's how my business sort of first started. Now that it's been like a year into the concept, it's now switched and I'm sort of moving towards guides, like books that will describe like step by step how to find resources for anything that you need resource for. Because I realize with AI, it can give you the information, but sometimes people don't know how to ask the right questions. And you, with these devices, you have to have a specific prompt to be like, oh, I need this or I need that. And just like having the information itself is not the only step. Like people need to know like how to navigate it, what expectations are in terms of like when you submit an application, like how long does it take before you get a response? And if like you're declined, how do you go about appeals? Like specific sort of social work things that like I spent like 6 years like learning in my profession cannot be summed up into AI. And so now I'm shifting the model of my business to be more like user friendly of like providing like step-by-step guides and step-by-step information for people. And additionally to that, like down the road, like webinars and other types of presentations where like people are taking like through the steps by like knowing like what to do like every step of the way.
Thank you, impact. Logan.
So my venture first started when I actually got laid off from a position as a consultant for inclusion, diversity, and equity. And um, I I really enjoyed that work because as a social work graduate myself, I focused my studies and my placements on like professional development for corporate organizations within equity and anti-racism as well. And so when I got laid off from this job that I thought was my dream job, I was like, why not? Why can't I just do it by myself and give myself the flexibility and the accommodations that I need without even asking for them because I would do them for myself, right? And so like I just think that it was just the it was just having the confidence to be like I've been doing so well in this job that I've been in for quite a while and I've developed a following and I have clients and just because I'm not connected to a specific consulting firm anymore doesn't mean I can't do it. So it's just gaining the confidence to start my business, but then um, now um, a lot of the clients from there have been following me, and so I've had a lot of repeat business as well as doing panels like this, but also doing various like workshops for small corporate organizations, as well as as a queer person, I had a lot of business during Pride. So the business goes up and down, and I'm finally starting to see some financial gain out of it, which is really exciting. So I'm just honestly happy that it's working out.
Thank you. I just want to say that I've been following your three journeys and it is very empowering just like witnessing what you are accomplishing. Thank you for just spending time with us today. Um, question for does ableism as well as other types of oppression. So often your experiences as a disabled and or neurodivergent entrepreneur is so what are some examples? We will begin with you back and then those. Thank you.
Yeah, so the thing is like a lot of, for me, organizations that I've so far worked with in the realm of like with Tech Alliance or with the London Small Business Center, and other local small business organizations or startup organizations, like they whenever I'd be like, oh, is it like wheelchair accessible? And they're like, we don't know, because it's like a lot of their staff are like able-bodied individuals, and I feel like a lot of people who attend their events are other able-bodied individuals, so they kind of, I don't know if this is like the case, but like it's kind of like one situation where I'm like, I think I'm the only wheelchair user that's like really entered these spaces. Not that I'm like the first person with disability in general, but I think I'm like the first wheelchair user. And so like for them, like having to be like, oh, we have to like double check, or it's kind of accessible if you come in from the back and like go down this hallway and that hallway and like whatnot. And so that has been really interesting, but it's like I get it, because like these organizations are made up of people who are completely able-bodied.
So I touched on a couple of ones already. The massive Pride event that basically just doesn't want an ugly looking wheelchair ramp. Literally cannot believe it. World-class talent singer couldn't perform because they wouldn't put a wheelchair ramp out for him, and it's just outrageous, and it makes me so mad. Probably got quite a few other examples as well. Like I said, I had this very physical job, and then you can't really make accommodations in that kind of work, so I transferred into different kinds of work. But then you think working in a school with disabled children, people are going to be understanding there's going to be accommodations that are made, but that just isn't the case. The education system is also not set up at all to, from my experience in about 11 different schools, to support disabled people that are working there, disabled staff members. So it's like, oh my God, you're taking another day off because you got sick, because the children are all sneezing, and then everyone's coming into work really sick and then coughing, and it's like, yes, yeah, my ME has me on my back at home. And then when I entered the performing world, I kind of encountered this different problem. Like I said, queer venues are, because they're just kind of not the capitalistic money-making ventures that that people love. They're in basements. They're in literally reworked bathrooms in London, which is like amazing. But accessibility is really woeful. So we're doing what we can within our group to I will only produce shows at accessible venues now, because I want to make sure that we've always got a lineup that has got disabled people on it. At least, you know, like 50% should be disabled performers. One of the things that we're doing with our 18-month fantastic project, if we get the funding, is we're doing a nationwide tour of the UK, and every single venue is going to be accessible. But during that process of applying for funding, it was a nightmare trying to find a queer venue that was accessible, because as you said, Hebak, like you phone people up or you message them and you're like, hey, is it wheelchair accessible? And they're like, yeah, it is, but it's just up 3 stairs. So as long as we can carry your wheel, and it's like, no, that's not accessible. Oftentimes the information isn't even communicated on their website, so you then have to spend half an hour trying to find this out. And it's the admin that I think, I've gone completely off topic, but it's the admin that I think non-disabled people just do not understand, like they cannot fathom. So in short, coming back to the point, yes, I've encountered ableism as a freelancer, as a self-employed person, but much less than when I try and fit into the rigid system of being employed by someone else. I think one of the biggest problems that I found in the performing world is that older disabled performers who have done this are often, they're told that this is the way, and so they pass down that message of this is just showbiz and you have to deal with it. And we actually, one of like the larger organizations for disabled and queer performers has been shut down because the organizer was not providing any accessibility for the performers, and instead being very abusive and saying it's show business, you have to get on with it. And it was completely mind-boggling to witness, and then also very transphobic, racist, and didn't acknowledge non-binary people at all. So I mean, very problematic. But it's so frustrating when you finally think I found this wonderful group that's going to help me, that's going to help other disabled queer performers get on stage, and actually they're doing the opposite because they have had to encounter ableism and, you know, ableist architecture and systemic systems of oppression, and they're just like, well, I'm going to pass it on. Yes.
Think. Okay. Question 5. Can entrepreneurship act as a form of resistance against inflation and other types of oppression? If so, how? Impact and
Sorry, did you want to say something, Chloe?
no, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think entrepreneurship can be definitely a form of resistance because, again, like as like George said, in just general workplaces, there's a lack of understanding for people who are have a disability or neurodivergent, and just what accommodations look like. Like a lot of organizations, whether they be for profit, not for profit, government run, whatnot, like they're just like, oh well, we don't have to add, like, if we don't want to add like one more thing that we have to do in terms of accessibility or accommodations or this or that, so they'd rather just not, because they're like, oh, it's gonna cost money, and it's like, it doesn't really cost money, but like, okay. And so that's one of the reasons why, like, for me, like, I wanted to work in physical rehab places or hospitals, because they're like one of the few places that have a truly accessible washroom for somebody like myself that needs a Hoyer lift, a large changing table, things like that, because like I would never be able to have something like that if I was working in a regular office space, because they would have to construct something like that for me, and the odds of them volunteering to do that are like slim to none. And so I think if more people who are not able-bodied enter the entrepreneurial route and start their own businesses, they're making employments for themselves, but there's also showing the wider society that it's like, yes, like we can contribute to society, we can contribute to the employment market, we can contribute to like taxes, and like we can contribute like all of these things, because I have several friends who have degrees in all different backgrounds who like have never been able to get full-time employment. Like at most they'll get freelance work because different companies are hesitant to hire a graphic designer or whatnot who has a disability, because they're like, well, we don't know if we're gonna have to, take days off, or the work is gonna be as good, or this or that, or all these different excuses. And so I think in terms of like showing like how people with disabilities can be like amazing for the workforce is through self-employment and is through entrepreneurship, because that's a huge form of like showing up against oppression and against people's stereotypes of our community.
Thank you back. We will go to Logan and then close. Thank you. Logan, I'm sorry, you're on mute. Logan, I,
Oh,
I,
it's okay. Now I think I'm on off mute. Okay.
yeah, thank you.
Uh, so what I was saying is I think that entrepreneurship can act as a form of resistance because particularly in the professional services and the training and consulting that I do, even within the consulting firm that I was at and and are currently at, some of the firms don't include disability or ableism or like topics of as topics of diversity, and I wanted to start my business as a consulting firm to ensure that everything that I do includes disability and the topics of ableism as a form of oppression, because we talk about racism and other forms of oppression all the time in like these big corporate consulting firms that I worked for, but disability was never mentioned, even though me the um the presenter of this information was disabled, and I would often get questions about why I wasn't talking about it. It was just because the organization I worked for did not have any information, and as an employee, um I tried to inseminate a lot of disabled queer information within the types of forms of oppression when I was speaking about them. But I think there was a lot of I would say like policing or like of how I was presenting it and how I was um int um like interacting with the audience on those topics, because I'm like naturally very critical of these types of oppressions because of my lived experience. So I created my business to resist against um the capitalist way of basically performing my activism. Um and yes, I think it's an act of resistance.
Thank you, Logan. You raised such good points about EDI and the discrepancy in like disability awareness and education in compared to other communities and forms of oppression. So thank you for bringing that up. I did see another and let we go to the next question. Oh, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, please. Yeah, so I think as soon as we take the means of survival into our own hands, we're stepping, albeit only a little bit, outside of the system of capitalism, which is such like a massive form of resistance. And we're moving from what multi-million pound or dollar companies say the ideal is, to working with our authentic audience who, despite what mainstream marketing will tell you, have a need for you specifically and what you do specifically, have a need for what you can offer specifically. So not only are we sidestepping ableist working structures that don't allow for our bodies and minds to work in the way that we need, think of how inaccessible all of the ways that we've mentioned, 8-hour days in an office. We're also appealing to a demographic that capitalism hasn't deigned sexy enough to make products for or pitch experiences to. But most importantly, we're finding our purpose, our talent and our gift, and we're creating the conditions for ourselves and our art or our vocation to thrive. And then we're literally changing the world just by living and working authentically. I also think as well, when it comes to writing, any kind of performing arts, any kind of arts, we're also literally putting different people and different ways of being and different ways of seeing the world on stage. Representation in media is so important. I can think of so many films and TV series that I've seen or books that I've read where disability is portrayed as this tragic, awful thing, where we have very little agency, where we have little to offer the world or people, and it's so sad. And I think when you get fed that story again and again and again, able-bodied or disabled, we start to take that in, and then that's the mirror that society holds up to us, and we start feeling that about ourselves. Non-disabled people start to see us like that as well, and assume that that's an accurate representation. So I think by being a freelance artist, by putting new stories up there, by actually authentically representing disabled people, we're changing people's minds, and hopefully we can bit by bit kind of have that take effect and kind of get into people's brains, change society that way.
Sorry, I cannot find my audio button. Thank you, Josh. We will proceed to the next question. What types of resources and services exist to foster accessible and inclusive spaces within entrepreneurship? What types of resources and services must be implemented to further support disabled and or neurodivergent entrepreneurs? We will begin with you back and then go directly to those. Thank you.
So I think like the biggest resource that sort of needs to be done is in terms of like funding. Like I am somebody who is on ODSP, and if I like make more than like $1,000 in any type of like work environment, like that will affect my disability. But it's like you submit like the information that you like make for the whole year, like in January, and they like deduct or like not deduct based on like how much you made. And like having other friends who are entrepreneurs, like when they like owe you more money, or if they in their experiences, like, or like the discrepancy of like if you make like literally $1 over that $1,000 like threshold, it can like still off the balance of the finances like quite a bit. And if they make a mistake about like how much they owe you, then it'll take like forever for like that money to come in. And so it's like I've seen it firsthand how it's like the whole setup of like ODSP in terms of like any type of work has discouraged a lot of people from wanting to enter the workforce, because it like damages your finances, or it can damage your finances in a very like catastrophic way. And especially if you live by yourself, like I'm a person who lives like in my own house by myself. And so like I depend on ODSP to like pay my rent and pay like all of my resources and stuff. And so it's a catch-22. Like if you do make money, you have to make like enough money to not only meet your like basic needs, but all of your medical needs, all of your financial needs, because for me, ODSP like pays for repairs on like my wheelchair and like my medical devices and stuff like that. So that is something that I would have to pay for going forward. And so like the level of like financial responsibility to be completely off like government assistance is huge. And so you either have to make like below a certain amount, or you have to make a significant amount in order to bridge that gap, unless somebody has like private insurance and whatnot. And also there's like very few funding to help like start up a business, which like I understand, like, you know, large amounts of businesses fail within like the first year. And so like there has to be some type of like balances, especially when you're getting like government grants to start a business, that it's going to be a sustainable business. But it does add an extra barrier, because like for somebody like me, I'm currently using my savings to help create and like sustain my business until I can get like profits coming in. And so if somebody doesn't have a savings, or especially significant savings, then that's another barrier if you don't have like family or friends. And then it be like, even though there's no grants, there are like loans that you can take out for businesses that are like low interest, maybe even no interest. But again, like that is something that would be like hard for people, because it's like it's an obligation. It's like if you take out a loan, you have to like pay that back, and you have to make sure that you earn a certain amount of money through your company in order to pay that back. So there's a lot of moving parts that people have to deal with, and people have to sort of like get their heads around. But I really do think there needs to be like better resources put in place an ODSP in order to encourage people to start their own businesses and enter the employment world without having their like financial or their like drug benefit or whatever resource they get an ODSP to be impacted dramatically. And there has to be like more grants and other types of funding to help start a business and help like sustain the first few years of the business.
Think you that you raise a lot of great points, one of which I would love to touch upon more. Does ODSP offer any support at all for disabled entrepreneurs?
Well, support as in like, you know, good girl, like that's like what I sort of tell us, where it's like sort of like, you know, positive words of encouragement. But in terms of like support of like, you know, these are the guidelines in terms of like how much you're like allowed to make. There are deductions that you're allowed to use, but like another thing is that like even if I like the rare grants that I've seen so far that I can apply to, like if I were to get them, that counts towards my $1,000 like maximum. So even if I use like all the grant money towards my business and nothing towards me personally, it is still counted as income, and therefore it can like add towards the deduction of the amount of money that you make, that is at, or not make, but the amount of money that the ODSP gives you in order to pay your basic needs. So it's literally a catch-22. It's like I need funding to get my business to a certain level, but that funding is going to be considered income, even if I don't use any of it towards my personal income, and I use it, let's say, towards advertising, or if I use it towards like purchasing of equipment or purchasing of like software and stuff. Like some of it is deductible, but a lot of it is not, and so that's why it's even hard to like find grants, and so some people might just go towards getting a loan instead, which is like, again, you're incurring debt, which is not great.
Thank you for sharing that. Yet another gap in the system that is not being addressed. Thank you for raising that. We will go to source and then directly to Logan. Thank you.
So we have a few really wonderful organizations in the UK. So we've got Shape Arts, who are fantastic for disabled writers, particularly. Like they have all these opportunities, so you can get funded mentoring, you can get like funded assessment packages for your book. So as a freelance creative, I suppose like my priority was legitimizing myself as, you know, a published writer, somebody that I could then say, I am good enough that, you know, I can offer you services, I can offer you editing, I can offer you feedback and workshops. So that was a really important organization for me. Also Equity are really great. Join a union. I'm just going to say that on repeat. But actually, otherwise, like I'm not sure. There's a huge shortfall when it comes to giving disabled people advice on how to become an entrepreneur, on how to set up, and then in general as well, like you're back for saying, like we have obviously a different benefit system here, but it's also one that is so restrictive that you can't work past a certain amount without losing benefits. You can't move in with your partner without losing your benefits. It's a complete nightmare. A lot of us just lose everything. But one thing I did find really handy is, so I was talking about Andrew Gerzer before, and one thing that they encouraged me to do was to start my own podcast. So I started a podcast so that I could talk to other disabled and non-disabled creatives about how to work and what their experiences were like with ableism, racism, homophobia, transphobia, well, like literally absolutely everything to do with being creative and being self-employed and being marginalized. And that, I think, has been a wealth of like just usefulness. Like it's been completely amazing. Also, what was I going to say? So one of my side hustles at the moment is I'm a panel member for an organization that literally wants to give thousands of pounds to small queer groups that are starting up, which is fantastic. But one thing that is completely surprising is you've got kind of groups that there's different categories. There's specifically it's focused on trans and non-binary people, queer and of an ethnic minority, queer and over a certain age. There has been absolutely no applications from queer and disabled groups. And I think the reason behind that, this round anyway, previously I was successful, which was nice, but I think it is so confusing to try and start a business, to try and start an organization, to try and set up on your own. And I think there just needs to be a lot more information about it. So, yeah.
I think I was lucky enough to have parents who also own their own business, so I got a lot of information from them, which was very helpful. But what I wanted to mention was what the other panelists have said about ODSP. It's true, like we can't make up to a certain amount without losing our benefits that really support our disability. And as someone who had a full-time job and lost ODSP, and luckily I was making enough money to support my disability needs. But I was just like, not everyone will be in that financial situation where they're able to take on a full-time job knowing that they will lose their government benefits. And I wanted to mention that I was lucky enough to do so, but also like this past year when I needed a new wheelchair. And obviously you can't pay for a new wheelchair out of pocket, like regardless of whether you have a full-time job or not. So essentially, it was a blessing and a curse that I got laid off from that full-time job, because otherwise I wouldn't be able to afford a new wheelchair. And like, those are the types of decisions that disabled entrepreneurs have to make, and I don't think that's fair. So.
Thank you, Logan and Sophie. You back?
I sort of wanted to like just add on to like Logan's like last statement, and it's like, something that I've noticed like through my lived experience and through my social work career, that like having a disability and being low income are like linked together when it comes to resources. So if you are not low income, then like you often don't get resources for people with disability, because they're like, oh, you should be able to like afford this, afford that, and like I've had like parents who are like middle income, as like my clients, and they therefore do not get funding for their child to get a wheelchair, and they're like, you have to pay for it out of pocket because you're not low income. And it's like, who has like $30,000 or $50,000 laying around to pay for a new wheelchair? Which is the answer is no one does. So they either have to like take out a loan, or they have to do, fundraising attempts, and get like their community to support them to help pay for those resources, because they are lucky enough to not be low income. But it's like, not being low income doesn't mean your disability vanishes, but those two things are always seem to be linked together.
Thank you for adding that. You back? We have 3 minutes left on to close the panel. Would anyone want of the panelists would like to ask any final thoughts? Okay, yeah, we would get into questions now. Thank you, Elia. So, we have about 5 minutes for questions. Please feel free to unmute yourself or write them in the chat. Get a question from Elia for others who decide. Sorry, I lost the question.
I can read it. It
Yes,
says,
thank
for
you.
others who decide to pursue / starting out entrepreneurship, what piece of advice would you give?
Yes, those and then impact.
So I think really useful piece of advice for me, not just for entrepreneurship, which I can't even say, but for life in general, is like, so it's from the Bhagavad Gita, but don't let that put you off. It's find out what your purpose is and then do it full out. But I think I would caveat that with, that doesn't mean drive yourself into the ground working, like every hour that you can. Have boundaries, I think, is kind of my biggest piece of advice, is make sure that, because yeah, it's great, we're flexible, we're not, you know, having to be in an office from 9 to 5, but we are then at home in our workspace for all intents and purposes. So you could work at any point 24/7. Don't do it. Don't just kind of like sit there being like, I'll just do some like promotion on my mobile phone. How old am I? But because that's such an easy trap to get into, you know, like, oh, like I had a flare on Tuesday, so Wednesday I'll spend like 7 hours straight sat on my sofa. I'm resting, but I'm not resting. I'm on my phone doing social media promo. So I think boundaries, hard boundaries. Yeah.
Great advice. Thank you back. And then Logan.
So I wish I did this like when I first started my business, which is like to look at, and now I'm doing it because like I'm applying for like a lot of grants for my small business, and that is to like truly do the math of your demographic. Like in terms of, instead of just saying, you know, I want to provide resources for people with disability, to be like, okay, how many people with disabilities are there in Ontario? From that, like how many, if you say like you got 10% of the population to buy your product or to pay for your services, how much would that make in a month? How much would that make in a year? And like really, like, which is like, there's a reason why I went into social work and before that media studies, because like, I'm not a fan of math. I'm not, like, me and that math have a very complicated relationship. But like, if you start your own business, you have to know your numbers and you have to know what your demographic is, how much to sort of charge for that demographic, how much do you need for your business to be sustainable year after year. And then once you figure out that number, the next number you have to figure out is how much resources do you get if you're an ODSP just outside of the monthly money to pay like rent and like basic needs and stuff. But on top of that, in terms of like, if you like lose your drug coverage, how much would that be a month or quarterly that you have to pay for? If you lose your housing subsidy and you pay market rent, how much would that look like? If you get like any type of resources for like Logan said, for wheelchairs or this or that, how much does that look like? How many times, not just to get a new wheelchair, but like the maintenance of it in terms of like if you have, you know, something like your one of your brakes is like loose or one of this happens or one of that happens, like calculate how much it would cost for a serviceman to come out to your house, how much like the maintenance of something like that would cost, and know those two numbers and make sure they equal out to each other, especially if the business is starting with just you, then you are the one that's going to have to finance it through either savings or a loan. And so make sure that you understand like how much money you can realistically make and whether or not that would sustain your livelihood for the foreseeable future.
Thank you back. I recognize that we only have 2 minutes left, and I want to remain mindful of the time of everyone. Logan, do you mind quickly saying your thoughts?
Sure. I'll try to make this quick. So what I was gonna say is that I think to maintain my disability needs and my financial needs, I don't think I'll ever become like a full-time entrepreneur. Like I kind of use it as like a side hustle. Um, and I think one piece of advice would be if you are like not in a financial situation to do that, like you can find other jobs. but also make sure to like communicate that you are an entrepreneur to your current employer so that you can prioritize your business as much as you want to, as much as you can.
Amazing. Thank you, Logan. First and foremost, I would like to thank so Impact and Logan for their vulnerability during today's discussion and allowing us to learn from their insights and reflections. I appreciate your authenticity and generosity and your willingness to share your diverse experiences. Thank you to our access team and to my needs team as well. And please do not hesitate to contact me on this recording will be made available on YouTube. Thank you all for joining us, and then we can stop the recording. Thanks.